Two, one. All righty. Good afternoon, guys. Those of y'all, since we're going to wait a bit for y'all to realize that we are not on the computer stream today, we've got Mr. James Stejskal, and we are going to be talking about not only his unique service to this nation, but we're going to be talking specifically about Det A Berlin and their unique mission set and the unique men that served alongside Mr. James when he was in Det A in Berlin. And while we've already got some people in, so that's great. We're gonna go ahead and let Mr. James treat us to a video, and he's gonna take it over and show us the video to start off with.
Thanks, Bud. First off, nice to see everybody here. I don't see you, but it's nice that you are here. One caveat, you're going to have to deal with my voice. I sound like a frog, but such is life. Anyway, we're going to talk about Detachment A, Berlin, and its successor unit, Physical Security Support Element. Both units were in Berlin from 1956 to 1990. And I'm about to click on a video that was done by U.S. Army SOCOM a couple of years ago once the unit was declassified. So this is about 2.5 minutes, but gives you a good flavor. So stand by. And we're off the air.
Wow. What a presentation. That is a heck of a video. Wow. Let me see here if I can get us to, there we go. All righty. That thank you, James. That feels weird calling you James. I still like saying Mr. That was absolutely wonderful, and it looks like most of the folks are joining us and they got to see the video, and they're starting to join in little by little now. So just until we start getting people in, because like I said, Det A is so interesting considering what all y'all did. I'd like to, if you don't mind, kind of start from the beginning. I've been listening to a lot of your podcasts. I've read your book, one of your books. I will be getting the several others. Guys, I recommend you get out and buy his Special Forces Berlin book. I don't have his Snake Eaters Chronicles or his latest book on Lawrence of Arabia, but I will be linking that in the in the video links at the bottom. But Mr. James, where did you where were you born? Where did you come from? What's your origin story, so to speak?
I really wish I know. My mom wouldn't tell me. No, that's not quite true. I come from the Midwest. I was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. Back out on the cornfields. My father was Army. My mom was a teacher. Two older brothers, and naturally, I was the one in the family that followed my dad into the Army. One of my brothers became an FBI agent and retired a few years ago. The other was sort of a beatnik. Back in the day, he was my older brother. He was an artist. Still is an artist. Anyway, um, I did the high school, started to go to university, but I really didn't have a good handle on what direction I was going. So I said, what the hell? And always been interested in the Army. And so I joined in 1973 in January. So I served with the Army for 23 years. Anyway.
Wow. Okay. I noticed so right there at 1973, you're right there at the tail end excuse me, the tail end of Vietnam. What well, first off, before we get into that question, where did you end up after you joined?
Well, 1973, things were beginning to wind down. I didn't really have a good idea of what was happening over there. It happened fairly quick after that, but Vietnam was winding down. The draft had just stopped. Volar came in, the Volunteer Army came in about 6 months after I joined. But between the draft stopping and Volar coming in, I just fooled them all and enlisted voluntarily on my own. So the the mood in the military was kind of depressed, I think is a good way to say it. There were a lot of issues going on. Race relations were really poor back then. They had also done a RIF, reduction in force, especially of officers. So we lost a lot of good people. And at that time, Special Forces was not really well regarded by the rest of the Army. So it was a difficult time to be in the military, and it was also fairly difficult to be in Special Forces.
Wow. Okay. Did you when you first joined in 73, uh did you after your basic and all of that, did you plan on going to SF, or did you end up in a leg unit or a airborne unit before you went SF, or how did that come about?
Sort of an interesting question because I joined specifically with the intention of getting into Special Forces. And what I did not know was you could not go straight in to Special Forces at the time. You had to have some experience. But my recruiter said that I could. So, and he said, this is the way to do it. You join the Army uh, as an infantryman, which I wanted to do anyway. Um, and you go into the 82nd Airborne, and they will pick you up out of there and take you straight to Special Forces. No, that was not the end. So I ended up in the 82nd Airborne Division, first in the 508th Infantry. And when I got to Fort Bragg after basic training at Fort Polk, advanced infantry at Fort Polk, airborne school at Fort Benning. I showed up at Fort Bragg, and about 300 of us went down to the Post Theater. And the commanding general of the 82nd got up on the stage and said, "Welcome to the 82nd." And then he said, "You're either going to ETS in your service here, or you're going to die in the 82nd." And I looked at the guy and said, "No, I don't think so." So, so I kind of pulled a fast one, not really a fast one. My recruiter did sell me a ticket. So I wrote my congressman. Actually, I wrote both of them. And apparently my letter was good enough because we were actually in the field. This is about 8 months after I had enlisted. We were doing infantry training. We were in the field, and the Judge Advocate General for the 82nd Airborne Division came out to the field location where we were at and said, "You are coming back to Fort Bragg." And so I went with him. I said, "What's up?" And I said, "Well, we want to interview with you." And so I went and saw the JAG, who was the full colonel. And he said, "So this is what your recruiter said?" And I go, "Yeah, this is the deal." And he goes, "Fine, you can take the test and if they accept you for the initial training, then you can take it. If you don't, then you're going to end up back here." Luckily, I passed the test.
Wow. What year did you officially go from the 82nd and well, what I should say, what year did you start the pipeline, so to speak, for
Started the
SF?
pipeline in early December of '73. I had to take the written test, the standard SF PT test, the physical test. So I passed both of those and went into training, Q course, at Camp McCall in December of 1973. So not the best time of the year to be at Camp McCall, but anyway.
Wow. And what I guess at that point in time, had you gotten had you been have you picked your MOS or what was that, or what were you planning on doing?
Well, because I had joined, I was a bonus baby. Because I had joined for 4 years and I got the princely sum of $2,500 for being an infantryman, I had to stay infantry. So I trained. I trained as a 1-1 Bravo, 1-1 Charlie, light and heavy weapons for SF training. I was cross trained later on, but I started out as a weaponsman. And once I completed the Q course, I went to 10 Special Forces, which was up in Massachusetts at the time. I really didn't
Okay.
want to stay at Fort Bragg because I didn't like Danville.
Wow. So right off the bat, you're going to team group. With it being 73 and uh, uh, okay, and in Vietnam, as you said, winding down and all of that. I've got to imagine you got a lot of Vietnam veterans that you were learning from, going through training group and all of that.
Oh, it was, I mean, completely Vietnam vets. Fifth group came back from Vietnam. I tried at one time to go to first group, which was at Okinawa, and still doing stuff in Thailand and such, but first group got shut down in 1974. So our options were basically stateside at the time, but all the guys that trained with us were Vietnam vets. Some out of Southern Climbs, 7th group down at Panama, or 8th group at the time. Some other guys, but we had Richmond Nail, who was a legend in Vietnam. Charlie Beckwith took over training at one time. That was slightly after me, but there were quite a few guys that were Vietnam veterans. And all through my career, up until probably the mid 80s, was when the number of Vietnam veterans started to drop radically. So when I got to 10th group, I had guys that were Vietnam veterans, but there were also still guys from World War II. We had a number of guys that had been in the 82nd and 101st who had jumped in on D-Day. We had some guys that were in the OSS, had a number of guys that were LAJAC soldiers. Some of them had served either in the resistance or they were in the armies of their particular countries. And we had some Germans who were also in the American Army. They could not come in as part of the Lodge Act, and I can go into that in a second, but they joined as regular immigrants. So I see somebody had asked about the foreigners, and those were the Lodge Act soldiers. They came in the 1950s, and that was kind of an idea of Colonel Banks, Aaron Banks, who set up the thing, one of the guys who set it up. But it was called the Lodge Act, and it was specifically done to recruit Eastern Europeans into the U.S. military and into special forces because of their language abilities, their area knowledge, and also the possibility that we might be going to war in Europe. So I'll go into that a little bit further when I get into Detachment A. That's pretty much brings us up into like 1975, 76 when I was up in Massachusetts with the 10th.
Yes, sir. Oh, let me pull this off. Y'all bear with me. I'm still learning all the tools of the trade when on my phone. But okay, so you're in 10th group now, and like you said, you're surrounded by Vietnam vets. You've still got a few WW2 vets. With you at 10th group, what exactly are you looking to do in 1973? Have you heard rumbles of Det A already, or are you looking to go to a group and do something that would have never happened had you gone to Det? What were you planning?
Well, I did not have any specific ideas. I didn't even know about Detachment A yet. It was classified. I did know from all my previous learning, I knew about the OSS in World War II, the history of special forces altogether. So I was looking to be involved in special forces where it might possibly get utilized in Europe. And that was, of course, 10 special forces. I had contemplated going to Bad Tolz, where one of the battalions was located. But one of the things the 10th group was to do field exercises in Europe every year. And so that was one of the big things I looked forward to. But that was also where I was introduced to somebody that was serving in Detachment A. And that really got my interest when that happened.
Okay, so that was your real first time ever even hearing about Det A, because it was so classified.
Yeah, it was about I'm going to say 1975, one of the trips we made to Germany. We were in the field as a team, and we had to deal with the quote unquote resistance fighters, which were part of the exercise. And most of them were actually West German soldiers in civilian clothes. So we were dealing with them. But one of the guys, the primary interface between us and the Germans was a guy who spoke very good German. I thought he was German until we got to talking, and he said, "No, I'm an American, just like you." And I said, "Well, where are you? Where do you work?" And he goes, "I work in Berlin." And from that moment, I said, "Oh, I think that's where I want to go."
That is, yeah, I can imagine you as a young man and looking for something to do. That probably definitely piqued your interest.
Well,
So
it had
how
everything I've been looking for, special forces operations in the field, but also it had, this is going to sound trite, but it had a James Bond quality to it. And I had two done on movies like, The Guns of Navarone, Where Eagles Dare, but also the James Bond flicks. And my father had given me a brochure for special forces after he came back from one of his military deployments. That was about 1964. So I had my eye on going to special forces very early. And Berlin just seemed to be the natural place where everything that special forces is about was the focal point for me.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing how quick you learned about it, and after hearing about it like that, you were ready to go. How long from when you hear about it, and I imagine you've got to go back to Massachusetts with the 10th group. How long until you can either put in or try out or whatever you need to do to get on the radar of the Det A bosses, so to speak?
Well, I had to build, one of the big things I had to do was to build my language proficiency up. So that took a while. They preferred to have people that had a little bit more experience. So I think it was probably another year and a half or so before I got the chance to go there. And I had to call the famous proverbial Mrs. Anderson. No, excuse me, Mrs. Alexander in Washington,
Yes.
and talk to her, and the usual things, send her flowers and chocolates. Well, anyway, so she got me on orders once the unit said they would accept me, and I got my orders in late 1976 and joined the unit in January of 1977.
Wow. Okay. That wasn't too long. What are there any after? I mean, we know Mrs. Alexander from the Saw guys, and the
Right.
Saw guys will come up eventually again when we on down the road. But how soon when you get those orders until you're over there and you're in Det A, so to speak?
Well, once you got the orders, it goes pretty quick. I could look back through, but I don't think it was less or more than about a month before I got rid of my stuff. I knew I was going, and then just shipped out. They gave us the usual stuff, you know, leave your green beret behind and all this stuff, and head out. So
That's what I was going to wonder. Did you get on the way out? Did you get since you knew you were going there? Did they say was there a pre-briefing or did everything secret and all that briefing wait till you got to Berlin to Det A?
if you get we got briefings before we went. The S2, the intelligence officer, security and intelligence officer at the unit would talk to us, and he'd say, and he didn't know a whole lot either, really. He knew the unit was there, but it was basically, okay, you're going over as military, but you're not special forces. So forget that. So I went over as a member of Detachment A. Nothing on my orders said special forces. It was straight into Berlin, and got picked up at the airport by one of my team members and taken to the building and given another security clearance or security briefing. So yeah, this is what you can say, this is what you can't say, etc. Somebody else, I was going to
Go ahead.
jump into one thing here. Somebody asked a question. Anthony says, Det A, there's a question. Det A was a super secret NATO force? No, it was a classified unit, but it was not part of NATO. It was a standalone unit, part of the U.S. Army Europe, and we were subordinate to what was called SOCUR, which at that time was support. I'll think of it later. It later became Special Operations Europe. It had a different title at the Support Operations Task Force Europe, SOTFE. That's what it was called. So we were classified. Our mission was top secret. The unit was classified secret, but we were not part of NATO. The Allies did not know we were there, and hopefully the Russians and East Germans didn't know we were there either. Anyway.
Wow. There's actually, since we're in Det A now, Scott Gross, his father was Dick Gross, Moose Gross. He was wanting to know.
Dick Gross was my team sergeant when I first got there in 1977. And I remember the back brace that he used to have to wear. So I was there from the first time from 1977 until 1981. He left fairly quickly after that. I believe 19, still in 1977, I think he left and went back to the States. He was simply too senior for the unit because he was a master sergeant at the time and he got promoted to sergeant major.
Wow. Okay. Yep. He says he went home August of '79.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. I'm so
I
glad he's watching.
That's I think he went to another team because my team sergeant became was a guy by the name of Russ Krajcik, another Czech name, by the way.
And speaking of Czech, there's some good questions that are going to come up, that are here. But while you're speaking about Czechs, wasn't the I'm gonna need to take that comment off. Wasn't the CO a Czech resistance fighter?
At that particular, yeah, he came in almost at the same time as I did. He replaced a guy who left under not so auspicious. I'm not going to get into the story, but he replaced
That's
a
fine.
former commander. His name was Stan Olszewicz, was the new commander, and he had been in Czechoslovakia when the Germans invaded in 1939 and left. Was able to get to France and spent part of his World War II years in France fighting the Germans. And then he came to the United States and joined the American Army. So our sergeant major was a German, though. And he had been a young guy, Jeff Raker, quite a personality. Jeff Raker was very young at the end of World War II and told us that the Germans had asked him, or more or less told him that here's your gun, go fight the Americans. And he said, well, I'm not really into this, so he didn't. We had another sergeant major, whose name I have just forgotten. I'll think of it. But he had fought in the Battle of Berlin, and there's actually a picture of him getting awarded the Iron Cross by Adolf Hitler in Berlin in 1945. And if he was really, let's see, if we were having a good time in the bar, he would complain about how he couldn't wear his Iron Cross on the American uniform. But that's another story.
Wow, I mean, what they're off the, I mean, the get go. What amazing characters that are already in there, and uh, if you since we're speaking about foreigners, would you like to speak a little bit about the Lodge Act before we get into some more questions?
I probably not really prepared to go into it too much. It was basically
Okay.
passed about 1952, 1953 with the legislature. It was pushed by a couple of senators, one of whom was Lodge, and
Hmm.
sponsored really by the army and tried to get some of these people in. And naturally, all the people that came in from Eastern Europe were sucked up into the military in the special forces. Um, there were a huge number of them, and in Berlin, even in 1977, 1978, I think about 40% of the unit was Lajak people. We had guys from Poland, Hungary, Yugoslavia. I'm trying to think. No Russians, but a lot. Oh, from Bulgaria. That was a really weird one. So we had a lot of interesting people. So you've got these Lajak soldiers, many of whom uh, fought in Vietnam. I think most of them, and then we had all the Americans, and probably 70% of the unit was Vietnam veterans. A lot of experience in the unit at the time.
Wow. And that'll end up coming up later. This is a good question, actually, because I was just looking at something about this. Was Det 39 a part of Det A or a separate program altogether?
Um, it was a separate program. I'm not even bringing up in my mind what Det 39 was.
Gosh, I just had it brought up. I'll when I find it again, I'll mention it. Gosh, it went blank on me. I'll look it up here in just a
The
minute.
person who put the question up there can answer that. No,
Yeah.
direct action.
Um,
Direct
it's
action.
speaking of the all the men. Mr. Urich, he participated in the largest tank battle of Kursk. Sydney Shachnow. He was Lithuanian. He rose to the two-star rank. I mean, a
So,
lot of
yeah, Sid Jacknow was there as a captain and then a major, and then he came back to be commander of Berlin in 1990 and was there when the American Army left Berlin. I'm not sure what he's speaking about with his direct action team, but I no clue.
yeah, I'm thinking there's a 39 SFOD. I've misplaced what I was looking at, but to further that on, here
If
is
you're talking
a
about
question.
39 SFOD, but 39 SFOD was the classified title for Berlin, 39th Special Forces Detachment.
Oh, okay, that's it right here, 1962 until its deactivation. That literally just hit me right in the face like a ton of bricks.
Except,
um,
except when Detachment A was deactivated in 1984, the designation 39th Special Forces went to Korea. So the detachment in Korea is now called the 39th Special Forces.
would that be that Det K technically that's mentioned at the in the book, I believe, or one of the books, I think. I thought it was Det K. Um,
Yeah, it
uh,
was that, and it's sometimes referred to as dead K.
mm, mm. Um, Jason Holmes, he says, the first question that comes to my mind about Det A is, was there a constant level of anxiety even when you're on your downtime?
Jason, that's a very good question. There was sort. You have to imagine being in a city the size of New York, the island, and being surrounded by a wall. Um, you're trying to carry on a normal life day to day. We were training, we were in civilian clothes 90% of the time. Even the Germans that lived in the city experienced anxiety. They had lived through the Berlin blockade in 1949, the almost second blockade in 1958, 59. So the West Germans that are living in West Berlin, the free Germans, supposedly, um, there's about 25,000 Allied troops in the city, and we're surrounded by East Germans and Soviet troops. The Soviet forces, Germany, it's called GSFG, Group of Soviet Forces Germany, numbered about anywhere from 750,000 to 1 million troops at any particular time. And the East Germans had a military force, Army, Navy, Air Force, probably 800,000. So, yeah, there was some anxiety there. We were kind of all wondering when the war would start. Um, so it was an interesting time. I really enjoyed it. Some guys did not like it. They preferred being out in the green more than we were. They preferred being on a mountain team or something like that, which we didn't have. We had guys that were mountain trained. We had a scuba team, though. We did not have a halo team. Halo wasn't really. We were already in our target area, so we really didn't see a need a halo in. So there were some people that preferred the more rucksack oriented kind of operations than what we were doing. But I was not one of them. I was, this was all what I was about at the time.
And speaking of about that, I mean, from day one when you get in and you're officially a part of the unit, so to speak, are you are you beginning the process of building legends for identities? How many identities are you guys expected to have, considering what all y'all are doing?
Well, it's a complicated question, and what you have to remember is you've got a unit of at that time. The first time I was there, it was 90 people. So it's not like you can build a Jason Bourne identity for each person in the unit. It's just not feasible. As we had to come together for training all the time. We had to. It's not like we were operating as individual soldiers. We were operating as a group. There were times that we operated individually, but so we had our normal identity, which we were a soldier in the U.S. Army supporting the mission of the Berlin Brigade. Problem was nobody knew what that mission was, and we were going to tell them. So that's our peacetime cover for status is, we're a soldier here. When we went out into the city, we might tell people that we were a student or we had a job someplace. I at one time was working in a restaurant. And then we had our wartime cover. And each person was given the cover documentation that would allow them to pass most Soviet and East German control points. Think of it sort of as an OSS guy jumping into France. You've got a cover story and you're given documents, but you really haven't got a whole lot of backstopping. So it was a difficult place to be in. Our basic procedure was if there was a war, one identity would go out the window. That's your true U.S. soldier identity. and you would have your undercover identity, which had not been compromised in any way because you're never using it, and you disappear. Or we knew that if a war would come, we would have some time to get out and begin the mission. Um, we also knew that we had to get as far away from the American facilities as possible because the East German Soviets would come into the city in pretty rapid fashion to try to eliminate us, basically. And everything was based on being prepared to leave the city, having equipment elsewhere, and having a good identity and a good plan of action to get out and disappear fast.
Wow. How well, actually, this is a great question before I even ask mine. Uh, how would your sabotage operations behind Soviet lines have looked like had they taken place, ambushes, raids, etc.?
Uh, yeah. Well, the first thing you had to do, well, it depended also. We had targets that were inside the city, things like the radio in the American sector, some of the power plants, both in West Berlin and East Berlin. Those would have been um, kind of, I'm trying to figure out a good analogy. But it would be a civilian clothes kind of raid, similar to, well, terrorists. It would be just like that. It would be people in civilian clothes getting close to a target inside of a city and then doing as much damage and getting away as quickly as possible. Um, you know, the the best way to defeat a criminal is to understand how they work. And so policemen that become criminals undercover act like criminals. So if we were going to be sabotaging things, we were going to be terrorists. And there was no doubt in our minds that if we were captured or caught, that we would not survive it. We had targets outside the city, railway junctions, bridges, two big command and control sites, one for the Russian army, one for the East German army. Each team had as much intelligence um, as you could possibly hope for on those targets. And those targets would have been like a classic military raid behind the lines. Sneak in on the target, eliminate the security, go in and destroy the target, and then hopefully escape.
Wow. Wow. What was well, he's got a part two to that. Wow, this is a good one. What was your intelligence on the combat readiness and combat ability of the East German and Soviet forces? Were there specific enemy units that were rated higher than others?
Well, that's one of the benefits of being in Berlin was that was probably one of the biggest intelligence collection sites for the Allies in the world. We had intelligence overflights, both satellite, a little bit later, satellite, but also aircraft flying and taking photographs. We had the agency reporting on things. We had a great deal of mapping of everything around the city. And we had something called the military liaison mission, which was a legal coordination function between the U.S. Army or the British and the French with the Russians. The Russians had people in West Germany who did nothing but watch the American military just to make sure there wasn't a build-up for war. We did the same thing in East Germany, and it wasn't very big. It was probably a total of about 40 people, and at any one time there'd be at least 4 or 8 Americans, Brits, or French inside East Germany looking at the Russians. There were places they couldn't go, but there were a lot of places they could. So they watched the Russians, and at the same time, they collected intelligence, both on the capabilities of the units, Russian and East German units, and on facilities. So we had ground level photography, we had mapping, we had everything we needed to hit these targets. And it was very, very extensive and very good. There were good units in both the East German Army and the Soviet Army. The East German Army actually didn't come into existence until about 1960, but they had police units, military kind of police units, and they had special purpose units. They had the 40th Parachute Regiment was their only airborne unit, but it was a special purpose unit. And then, of course, the East German State Security had its own regiment of special operations unit. It was called Mach Regiment Felix Dzerzhinsky, and that was about a 1,000 man unit. And then, of course, you've got the Russians who have their GRU and KGB Spetsnaz units. They were also there. The unit that would have come into Berlin first would have been the East Germans with their Stasi, the Ministry for State Security Special Purpose Units, and 40th Parachute Regiment. They had specifically the mission to take out the French, British, and American headquarters and try to capture any special units in the city. So it would have been quite a game.
To say the least, it sounds like. I mean, with you guys having with this much great intel, and you're watching their every move. What were some of the techniques, or what were y'all doing to disguise y'all's movements, or to make sure y'all didn't get penetrated or your cover get blown as a whole, so to speak?
Well, that's just it's the whole operational security procedures that you try to undertake to disguise what you're doing or to make people not see what you're doing. On a day-to-day basis, that was difficult for some things. It was difficult to go to the range and not be seen by the West German police, or you never knew who might be reporting on you. Even some of the West German or West Berlin nationals who worked for the American Army, there were a number that were reporting to the Soviets or the East Germans. So that was always a problem. Once we went into the wartime mood, or mode, you're in civilian clothes if you're inside Berlin. If you're part of one of the urban unconventional target teams, then you're wearing civilian clothes. If you go outside the wall, then you had to come up with a plan to be low vis, and that quite often meant foreign uniform, either East German, what one of the favorites was the Kampfgruppen, which was basically the reserve of the East German Army. We had the East German weapons. You did what you could.
Wow. Oh man, that is amazing. I can't imagine, and thank God. I mean, as hot as it got, I can't imagine what would have happened had the balloon gone up. I can't imagine what y'all would have been doing and had to go through. It's still boggles my mind. Huh. Um, have you ever heard of God? I can't. I'm not good with German.
Diensteinheit 9. The East German, the Stasi went through several iterations of units, and I think another one which is not talked about a lot is the AGM, the working group of the minister. It was a special component. I think Einheit 9 became Abteilung 22 later on, and they were responsible for training um, terrorists who actually came into West Berlin and into West Germany. The um, the Jackal, um, and I'm again forgetting his name, Carlos.
Carlos,
Uh,
yeah.
spent time in East Germany, uh, and the East German Security Service was responsible for giving him support when he came in and blew up a bomb at the French Cultural Center. It was the East Germans that got him in with the explosives. The La Belle Disco bombing, the explosives for that came from the Libyans, but the East German security service helped them get it across the border and into West Berlin. So yeah, the, that was that was later on. They late 1970s, 1980s more they started doing that kind of stuff. But a lot of the problems with counterterrorism started and the stuff we see today really began in Germany and France, not to mention the Middle East against Israel. But so the Germans were right on the forefront of developing all these counterterrorism units. GSG 9 came after the fiasco in Munich during the Munich Olympics. Um, of course, they got help from the Special Air Service, and that's about the time. Also, 1975 was when the American Army started to realize they had an issue and started looking at counterterrorism, and that's Detachment A, um, basically the first counterterrorism unit in the U.S. military.
Wow. I mean you mentioned just a second ago, we really didn't start seeing the plane hijackings until late 70s, 80s and such. Did y'all have any issues that arose in your time at Det A that you either helped out with, or any terrorist situations that Det A was involved in or helped out with?
Well, the plane hijackings actually started about in 1970, 1972 in the Middle East. And then, of course, later on in Europe, GSG 9's most famous incident, I think, was 1978 with Mogadishu. Um, it's interesting, though, the reason that Detachment A got involved was because of aircraft hijackings. And the Army headquarters asked us whether or not we could handle the mission. And a study was done, which was about 2 beers in a bar. And we said, yeah, we can do this. So we put together a training plan. This is starting about 1975 before I got there. But our mission initially was counter hijack, including sniper teams, assault teams, and such like that. Later on, it became full spectrum counterterrorism operations. And by 1977, we were stood up as a counterterrorism unit. That was our secondary mission, our contingency mission, while we still had our wartime mission in case the Russians would go to war. And in that case, our sole mission in wartime was to try to slow the Russians down. The Russian and East German uh, thrust towards central Germany hinged on railway movement, and Berlin was the center of all the railways in East Germany. So we had a ring around the city, and that was one of our primary targets. But more and more as the 70s go along, counterterrorism starts coming into everything. So each team would train. We would have 2 sniper teams on each team, and on each 12-man detachment, we had 6 teams in the unit. On each team, we had 2 sniper sections and then 2 assault sections, 4-man assault sections. So we were organized pretty much as the units still do today. You can combine units, you can move them around, you can cut them smaller, just depending on what you would need.
Wow. Um,
But I didn't answer your question. Um,
oh,
the reason we got so much training on aircraft out there was the German commercial airlines could not fly into Berlin because of the status of powers agreement. Uh, so it was British Air, Air France, and Pan Am could fly into West Berlin. So the Pan Am country manager on its own um, came to the headquarters of Berlin and said, this aircraft hijacking thing is kind of worrying. Do you have any need to like play with our airplanes and get familiar with them? I think we went out on a limb when he did that, but the end up the end of that was we went to the Tegel Airfield, Tegel Airport, to train with these guys, and they let us work on their airplanes in Pan Am ground handler uniforms. We were on the active runways, acting as cargo handlers and ground guides for these airplanes. So it was quite interesting. We also would go to the airfield at night. They would bring one of their aircraft out to a remote section of the airfield, and we would practice aircraft takedowns. Back then, it was mostly 727s, but we got very proficient. I've always wondered how the people in the airplane would have reacted if they had known that the night before we were punching out the escape windows in those same airplanes that they were flying.
wow. That is that is wild. How did during all of this training that's going on? I know a lot of it is in house and you guys alone, but how soon and how close were how close were y'all with the SAS guys, the French section, and the other allied section, so to speak, their units?
The French did not have any special units inside the city. They had a commando training group, which was basically a French version of the Ranger School. They started the training in Berlin and then would take people out of it. So the British did not have any special forces in Berlin. Occasionally, the SAS would come in. Some of their guys also work with a military liaison mission, their version of it, what's called Brixmas, the British military liaison, whatever. But they did not have any units. At that time, because of the classification of our unit, we did not really train with SAS. We did not want to let them know that we had a special forces unit in Berlin. And we had people that were trained by SAS or trained with them, 4 or 5 of them I can think of. But that slowly went by the way. We had one German national. He was an immigrant to the United States. Had a friend who was in GSG 9, and we set up sort of an informal training program with them. And we would go out to their headquarters in Bonn, and we sent at least 3 teams to train with them. So that was some of the cross fertilization. So no, we did not participate in the General Dozier incident. We were on standby, but we never participated. That's a question there.
Mhm.
At the very beginning, question is green light teams, the special atomic demolition weapons. One of the teams took part in one of the very first test missions for Satan devices. That was 1957, but even before the small suitcase nukes came in, they tested because we were the only unit in the Army, the only special forces unit that was required to have a top secret clearance, and that's what you had to have to work with the atomic demolitions. So they did some of the first testing with it. And there were contingency plans for using atomic weapons, but they were not stored in Berlin. It was just not practical to keep them in Berlin. They didn't want to lose control. Yes, Detachment A was involved in Operation Eagle Claw. We were not part of we did not generate Delta Force. Delta Force came out because of Charlie Beckwith at Fort Bragg, but we did participate in the Eagle Claw. The unit sent some of the first reconnaissance people into Tehran to collect intelligence because we were the only people that had the proper cover and training to go in as civilians into Tehran. Detail that in the book quite a bit. And then Charlie Beckwith said basically that he was tapped out just taking care of the embassy in Tehran. There were two targets in Tehran. There was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where 3 Americans were being held. And then there was the embassy, which was a 26-acre plot that held the other 55 or 58 people. Charlie's unit was going to take care of that. And Detachment A was going to send 9, originally 13 people, but then it got cut back to 9 people. And they would link up with our intelligence assets in Tehran and take out the people that were in the foreign ministry. So we were part of that. Had the second mission gone off, we would have participated in that because the numbers of people involved basically tripled. Yeah. That's most of those pictures are for the second mission preparations for that, and that's training at Hurlburt Air Force Hurlburt Field in Florida. We were doing our training separate from the Delta Force.
Those are some very good photos. And guys, if you don't have that, I have the book Amazon link in the show notes. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. I was gonna see where was I at on my question? Oh, while you guys were there, some of y'all's intel gathering expeditions sounds like they were pretty interesting. I mean, I can't remember if it was a tank or a new weapon system that actually ended up chasing some of the Dead A guys while y'all were out and about. Didn't that happen?
That's a classic story. Yeah, the East Germans or the Russians did not like us being in their training areas sometimes, and one of the incidents, the American team, which was an American officer who spoke Russian, he was an intel officer, and the driver, who was a member of Detachment A, were deep in the forest and happened to see a Russian what's called a TEL, transporter erector launcher, a missile carrying vehicle. It was a Scud, and it was a new sighting, meaning that they had never seen that vehicle before, and they were taking pictures of it, and all of a sudden the vehicle launched at them and was trying to run them down. They were in a sedan, and they were being followed by this very large 8-wheeled Russian vehicle. And so they ran naturally because they didn't want to get run over. The good thing about it was they were able to keep far enough ahead of the vehicle that they could clock it and figure out how fast the damn thing could And along with all the pictures they took, they went back and were hailed heroes.
Wow, that's one of many interesting stories about y'all out on surveillance. One thing that I really found interesting, guys, I'll get to those. Those are great questions. Is the scuba teams and how y'all would. I didn't realize Berlin was so full of so many little waterways and everything. Did y'all have army trained divers that were already had been there and knew the area, or were trained by the Germans to get up to speed to where y'all know?
Berlin has got more waterways and canals than Amsterdam, so it's a fairly big city, and it's got a lot of several rivers that flow through it, big lakes, and those connect naturally to East Germany and East Berlin. So we had special forces trained divers in the unit. I was one of them, but we had a number of people that were quite experienced, and a number of guys that were instructors in Florida at the Special Forces Scuba School. Um, so we had quite a lot of experience, and we would do a lot of the scuba training out in West Germany, where we could do whatever we wanted, or up in the Baltic. We also trained with the German version of the SEALs, the Kampfschwimmer, and we also trained with SEAL Team 2, which was stationed in Greece for a long time, and then it went up to Scotland. But so we had a good cross fertilization. Detachment A, because of its positioning, was able to purchase foreign equipment, and one of the things that we picked up was the Draeger rebreathers, and we were the first Army unit to have the Draeger rebreathers, and those got taken back to Florida, and eventually we convinced the SEALs, or UDT at the time, that the Draeger was better than using their Emerson rigs.
Wow. That's the dive portion. I was surprised to learn, like you said, has more canals than Amsterdam. It's wonderful hearing about some of those wild little training missions you guys would go out on. Really great stuff. We got a few viewer questions right here. What happened to the operational lessons learned by Det A, specifically in regards to undercover work? Were they passed on and used by future generations, i.e., Bosnia, maybe?
If you read the book, I talk about a little bit of it at the back end. The things that we learned. A lot of things were the Army has forgotten as a whole, especially with the switch over to the sort of kinetic side of counterterrorism. But a lot of it was remembered and passed on, um, especially after the Iran, after Eagle Claw. A lot of that information was passed on. And let me just say that there were successors to Detachment A, successor units that were formed. Can't really talk about them, but many of the people that were trained and had experience in Detachment A or the follow-on unit, PSSE, went to those units. So those lessons were preserved, and even now are starting to come back in the book, especially with what's going on in Ukraine and Eastern Europe.
Um, what were the contingency plans like for being compromised?
Um, I'm not I'm not sure what you mean by compromise, but basically, it's going to depend on the situation. If you're talking about when you're up in the field, when you're compromised, it's the same thing as what would happen to the SOG teams in Vietnam. You'd have to break contact or run, hope for the best. If you're undercover um, in civilian clothes, you better hope that your cover documentation was good and that your cover story was good. Because beyond that, I mean, there's a certain point where nothing's going to save your butt.
Wow. Did y'all ever have any close calls with guys being out in town and maybe slipping up or anything, and stuff being asked of them, or the police being called, so to speak?
Yeah, there were a number of incidents, and I detailed a couple of them in the book. But
Hmm.
we actually had more problem with running into criminal elements at times. And a number of guys, it was amazing what when you're out late at night in some seedy section of town, it's a little bit dicey sometimes. So there were quite a few incidents. We never had anybody. Well, we almost had some people. There were some of the guys that just sort of managed to break contact even inside the city. So good having a lot of top cover from the commander and the sergeant major, because they would generally just say it couldn't have possibly been us. We were elsewhere. So they covered things quite a bit.
Wow. Jason, sorry if this has been asked. I've been in and out because of work. A lot of SOG guys say they didn't think the stuff they did would ever be known. Did you feel the same way?
Absolutely. It wasn't until about 2010 that we started getting together to have reunions. Both units had been disbanded, Detachment A in 1984 and PSSC in 1990. And we started to get together and have a couple of reunions. And about the second time in, somebody mentioned the fact that if we don't capture this history, the Army would never do it. And um, I had been already working on some history stuff, and I basically said, "All right, I'm going to take this on." I did not realize how difficult it was going to be. First off, a lot of the materials have been destroyed for various reasons, and a lot of guys didn't want to talk about it. Most of the younger guys, the guys that knew me about the same age, younger, older, most were not a problem. The guys that were in the unit in the 1960s, I would call them up and say, "Hey, I'm going to talk to you. I'd like to talk to you about the unit." And they'd say, "I can't talk to you. I've signed a security agreement." And I would try to explain to them the routine that, yeah, I know I can talk to you, I can take notes, and then at the end of this, I get it all checked over by the military before it's released. But some of the guys just hung up on me and said, "No, I can't talk to you." So that part was difficult. Um, I also had, conversely, some people would I call, and 6 months later they would call me back and say, "Hey, I heard you're writing a book. I want to talk to you." So yeah, and I'd say, "I talked to you about 6 months ago," and they'd say, "Oh, was that you?" Yeah. Anyway, uh,
Wow, that's good. Scott Gross is wondering if he can get an autographed copy of your book.
well, if you can get him my email, I would be happy to talk to him.
I can absolutely do that. I will set that up whenever we get done with our interview today. Um, Scott, I'll get that to you, like I said.
Interesting question.
Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, we did. We reacted to both the assassination attempt on General Croson and on General Haig. As soon as we actually put personal protection teams, VIP protection teams out to help with those. And so at the, for example, at the change of command ceremony in Stuttgart when General Haig turned over command to General Gross, and the unit was there on both sides in VIP protection mode for both those guys.
Wow. I've one thing that I notice and keep looking at, and especially guys, again, his book, you really need to get it. He's got a great collection of photos all throughout the years that the unit was in Berlin through all their different name changes. It's an excellent book. And I've been curious, and I've been asked about it. How how did y'all come up with y'all shoot houses, and what weapons were y'all using?
The shooting houses were sort of an extension of what people had been learning from Vietnam. And, after Vietnam, we trained with a lot of police forces, especially up in Massachusetts. We worked with the police forces on close quarter battle tactics. We were not calling them at the time. We were by 1977 when two of our guys were trained by the SAS. That's when we started calling it close quarter battle. But we had seen various iterations of the shooting houses. Actually, one of the first ones was done by Fairbairn during World War II. The OSS had what they called the killing house. So you go back in history, and this is why studying history is good. You remember these things. And we just decided to build our own. So the commander went to the Berlin command and said, can we have half of this range? And the Berlin command said, okay, because our priority was pretty high at the time. And over the period of about 2 months, our engineer people, along with some of the weapons people, converted this range into a shooting house. And it was basically a series of rooms. Most of them were linear, so we could fire in basically 3 directions, couldn't fire backwards. And went that way. Later on, we got a hold of the German plastic training ammo, which was a little bit safer than using 9mm full military jackets. But we built the range ourselves and used it, and scared the hell out of a few people. The deputy commander of Europe came, a 4-star Air Force general, witnessed one of our live fire takedowns, which included shooting mannequins with balloons full of red paint in them. And when it was all finished, he said, but isn't this dangerous? And the commander, who was Stan Olshavik at the time, says, yes, but only for the bad guys.
Wow. That's I always enjoy seeing them, and there's guys. There's some really great photos of them in the kill house or shoot house, whatever you'd like to call it, and doing some dynamic entry photos that are just out of this world. Let me get to some of the views.
I talked about the value of having all this experience behind you, but we had guys that were trained by the SAS. We had guys that trained with other militaries. We had a number of guys that served with SOG in Vietnam. And all these guys brought in experience and ideas. And one of the great things about being in Detachment A and PSSE, because we had to reconstruct things when we created the new unit, was that it was all freeform, and the commanders knew that they should not get involved in how we were freeforming things. We would get together, and basically, if we had a mission to do, we would get together as a group and throw out ideas, and it would go back and forth. The officers were there to sort of try to keep order, but quite often it was the NCOs that were saying, no, let's try this. No, let's try this. And that's how most of the stuff was developed. And um, the good thing about when the units were disbanded, the people went back into the regular army or regular special forces and disseminated those ideas. And so there's still quite a few guys who are out there spreading those bits of information. I get called on. A number of the guys get called on all the time to go back and talk to special forces units, even some other outfits, other agencies about our experiences and how applicable they are right now in places like Eastern Europe and other places where we need to know how to do this urban unconventional warfare.
Wow. Wow. What was your assessment of the German units you worked with as far as readiness, capability, and even morale?
It depended on where you were. If you were working with the regular German army, they were horrible. They were all draftees. If you work with GSG 9, they were good, but they were police. They were not special forces. So they might be able to run circles around you with their Mercedes sedans, but if you get them out into the woods and have to do something actual tactical with them, they were horrible. One of the exceptions was the special police in Berlin, the Sondereinsatzkommando. They were very good. They were basically undercover police units that were also very skilled at urban operations. So they were good.
Wow. Scott, can he talk about Operation Flintlock activities?
Well, that's Scott. That's where I got into this unit, or how I got into this unit. Um, because I was on a flintlock coming from the States, and Detachment A was involved in the unit in those operations. And the whole principle of flintlock was to be working resistance forces behind the lines. American special forces would work with Germans and others to be behind the lines. That's what the whole exercise was set up to look like. And Detachment A was acting as the resistance leaders of those organizations. So every year, or almost every year, we would send a team out and they would split up and we'd operate on our own in the German countryside, being the interface between a resistance unit who were either Germans or whatever and the American Special Forces team. So our job was to portray a German resistance person, and that's how we would work with them. So eventually those got cut off though because the security issues were a little bit too hard to overcome.
Wow. Wow. Was there anyone you worked with that stayed in for a career and became high ranking, thinking like Major General Eldon Bargewell with SOG?
Um, Quite a few guys made colonel. Of course, the Lithuanian gentleman you mentioned before, I just forgot his name again.
Sachenko.
Who became a two-star general. Um, there was a guy I served with a bit later who came in as a captain and said, I'm going to be a general. And he retired about 3 years ago as a lieutenant general, Mike Nagata. Quite an interesting thing. But other guys have made it other ways. One of my very early compadres was a guy by the name of Mike Vickers, and I served with him when we were both Spec Force, Specialist Force class. He, of course, went on to work with the agency and the National Security Council and retired. And he just came out with a book just a while ago. Shack now, yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see here.
Weapons
I've
at the bottom.
yeah. Yes, sir. That's where we're getting to from earlier.
We were getting there, but we did not use the Walther MBL. The only unit I know of that used the Walther MBL were the Portuguese Marines. We used the Walther MBK, which was about 6 inches shorter, 9 millimeter weapon, quite reliable. I actually like it better than the MP5. We used the MP5 later on. And for pistols, we started out with the P38. It was German. It was deniable. Both sides used it. Then we went to the Walther P5. Then we switched to the Heckler Koch P7. And late in the game, about 1985, we picked up on the Beretta M9. Always 9 millimeter because you could get 9 millimeter easy in Germany as opposed to 5.56. Now you can get 5.56, but then it was difficult. You know?
Wow. Um, I hate to say it, guys. I'm my phone battery is just being eat up by doing a live broadcast. We're at an hour and 30 minutes here. I was wondering, Mr. James, if you would mind coming back and us finishing a part two and going into the latter part of your career and covering your new books that you've written since Det A.
Well, I think I should because I don't think we've gotten much beyond 1979 or 1980. So
Yes,
we
sir.
should keep it going. I've got to go make dinner anyway.
Yeah, I hate to say it, it's actually a perfect stopping time at hour and 30 minutes, and I'm actually writing down where we're leaving off on my questions and all that. Would you be fine though hearing next time you get free time if we do a part two and finish up?
Yeah, let's do a part two. The only thing I would say is now that we finally got the routine down, I know you and I struggled through this a bit, that maybe we should give people a bit more of a notification before we do it. So, and have people send in questions.
Oh, absolutely. Now that we've got everything working completely, I'll be giving week advance heads up before we do it.
Sounds good, bud. No,
All righty, guys.
appreciate it.
Yeah. You go. You would you like to add anything else before we end today, sir?
Uh, no, otherwise I'll start talking too much and we'll end up talking for another 10. I've appreciated all the questions, and I think there's a lot of other things that we didn't cover. But I'm looking at some of them now. I can see that we did not cover quite a few of them, but it would be good
Yeah.
to. It would
Yeah.
be good to
We'll
talk.
we'll 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 definitely get a part two together because, like you said, we barely even got into anything.
Thank
But
you,
all
bud.
righty, yes, sir. I'll touch base with you so we can set up a part two. And guys, thank y'all, and start getting your questions ready for part two. And Mr. James, I'll be in touch.
Take care.
Yes, sir. Bye bye. All right. Well, guys, we had two good ones in, even though we were playing by the nick of our hairs here. My phone is literally about to die. I hate we ended it so quick, but we at least got him on once, and like he said, we'll find out before he comes on, and we'll give y'all time to promote. I'll give me time to promote it, and y'all get some questions and everything together. Even though y'all did wonderful today. I hate my battery is killing the show here, but got to get it on the charger. It's been a long day setting stuff up and doing all of that. So hopefully y'all understand. Jason, you did great, brother. I hope y'all understand. I hate we had to cut it at an hour and 30 minutes, but stuff happens. So tomorrow, I'll be luckily only one show tomorrow. Tomorrow night, I'll be doing the DB Cooper show with Drew. So if y'all are free, join us and watch that. But we've got some stuff to look forward to with including a part two with Dave and a part two with Mr. James. So I will see you guys later. Thank y'all so much for bearing with me and watching today. I'll see y'all later.